Golf legend Phil Mickelson opened up on his gambling addiction on Monday. He said he will not partake in any gambling this football season.
Now, this comes after gambler Billy Walters claimed in his recent book that Mickelson wagered more than $1 billion in bets over the last 3 decades. We're not quite sure about that number, but that's what he alleges.
A remarkable number. I guess it accounts for a lot. On Monday, Mickelson posted a lengthy message about his addiction. Part of his tweet said, quote, "I won't be betting this year because I crossed the line of moderation into addiction," which isn't any fun at all, of course.
Let's bring in Michelle L. Malkin. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at East Carolina University and a specialist in addictions and in this field. So tell us, Professor, how do gambling addictions compare to other addictions?
Well, a lot of people don't realize that gambling takes an individual down the same pathway as substance abuse. And so although somebody's not putting a pill or alcohol or a substance into their body, their brain is being affected by crossing over into kind of a world of uncontrollable gambling. And we call that a kind of pathway towards gambling disorder, which is the pathological term for gambling addiction. And so what gambling addiction looks like is when somebody kind of crosses over, they can't gamble healthy again, and they will do everything in their power to try to get the next big win in order to pay off the debts that they have had, to get that high that a good win gives them, and in order to keep gambling.
You know, in reading about addiction, you get to understand how people can be, triggered and affected. If somebody is, has a food disorder, an eating disorder, it's really hard to navigate that. If somebody is addicted to alcohol, if somebody's an alcoholic, there's so much marketing going on. So I imagine that for somebody who is addicted to gambling, there's been such an increase in sports gambling, and every ad, it seemed, at the Super Bowl and all around us is promoting that. So how has this increase in gambling advertising affected people who are gambling addicts?
Yeah, it is nearly impossible to live in a state where there's been a legalization of sports wagering and not be seeing a constant gambling ad offering big wins and free money. When someone is in recovery from gambling, they need to stay away from gambling establishments. But in reality, if somebody has an issue with sports wagering, there's no way to stay away from the ads and the constant promises of big wins. And so people have access to sports wagering at the tip of their fingers. They can't stay away from a gambling establishment. And so all the advertising is a constant reminder of just down the line can be another big win.
Well, Mickelson says he's done, but how likely is it for him or others who are addicted to gambling to actually quit?
Well, gambling has one of the lowest recovery rates long-term. It's very difficult. And part of that is the shame and stigma associated with gambling. People are seen to be able to handle it responsibly, and there's just a lack of understanding around gambling. And so there's a lot less resources, a lot less education, a lot less outreach available to people who are struggling with this addiction. And so it is very difficult. People need to find the resources available, whether it's going to things like Gamblers Anonymous. There's a lot of help online. There are incredible gambling certified counselors throughout the country, and most states that have legalized gambling also have a council on problem gambling that can provide resources. So there's national and statewide resources, but a lot of people don't know about them.
Many industries have been positively affected when you talk about the economy around gambling. So there are some positives, of course, for people who are addicted to gambling, a great deal of negatives and being flooded by all that marketing. But what are the positives or negatives? Has there been a net positive gain since sports gambling became legal in the United States? How do you navigate that question?
So the way I would navigate that question is to say people have been gambling on sports throughout time, whether it was legal or not. And legalized and regulated gambling is definitely better than illegal and unregulated gambling, as it ensures better integrity and protection for the players. But that said, that legalization comes with responsibility to provide funding towards outreach, education, gambling disorder prevention and support services and research to understand the behavior risks and harms due to gambling. So legalization is definitely better than what we were seeing and see in many places where it's not legal. People are still gambling on sports.
Just a quick follow-up to you on that. Since you're a professor of criminology, do you see more criminality than associated with, or less criminality associated with it now that it is legal, or are you seeing more criminal cases?
Well, there's three kinds of criminality associated really with gambling. There's illegal gambling, which goes down as it's legalized. And then there's gambling in and around gambling establishments. But the biggest area that I focus on is gambling motivated crime, which are those crimes committed by people who cross over into gambling disorder and need to seek funds to keep gambling and pay down their gambling debts, looking for the next big win to get back ahead. And so what we see is those people who are seeking help for gambling, over 50% will have committed a gambling motivated crime, because unlike Phil Mickelson, most people don't have unlimited resources. And at some point they run out of legal access to funds. And that's where the issues around crime and criminality really come into play around the addiction of gambling.
Professor Michelle Malkin, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.